globalization and modernization, but Buddhism still continues to be the basic of the value system and a part of Cambodian culture. We don't need to do any philosophy or to philosophize, because if you have problem, you just go to the teaching of the Buddha in Buddhism, so you can find the answer. We have some leading Buddhist scholars in Cambodia, and this is one of our most respectful Buddhist scholar. His name is Untitled. I'm very sad to share with you that he passed away last week on the 12th of the natural causes, and he's one of the famous peace builder in Cambodia and also part in the world. He received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1998 and Rafto Human Rights Award in 1992. So what is our project? In Cambodia, bioethic education, I mean the formal one, the one that I just formal bioethic education is the integration of some topic which is very not so relevant in Cambodian context. For example, cloning or biobank are a little bit far from Cambodian context. So we have ethic education from the primary school to the higher education. But this, I'm going to share with you what is called the public bioethic education that is organized by 3 organizations, 2 Buddhist organizations and our center. So it is conducted in the formal or what I call public bioethic education, that we combine the Buddhist teaching, the local knowledge, and the formal bioethics. In this context, I refer to some topic in the book Cross-Cultural Introduction to Bioethics, published by UNESCO. So we organize 3 times a year in Cambodia, and the duration of the training is between 8 to 12 days. And the objective of the project is to provide ethical training and Buddhist education to youth and other interested people, and also to promote the sense of living in their moral community, in the mind and the action of the people. And the most important objective is to raise the public awareness about ethical issues relevant to everyday life and science and technology, public understanding of the moral issue and the science and technology problem. So the people that we work with are high school students, general public, mainly lay people, and there's a big number of the trainees, so there are around 250 people in one session. And the thing is, it's some kind of religious training, and combining with, and they need to live their lives as monk and nun also during this training. So their session, the learning period, and what is called the religious way of life during each day. And what do we teach? These are the topics that we included in our training. So it is the combination of Buddhist teaching, some self-improvement topics, and also some topics relevant to social ethic, environmental ethic, and some other topic that we pick up from the cross-cultural introduction to bioethics. So the way that we teach those people by lecturing the monk, the sermon or chanting, but it is a very practical, I mean the engage in terms not so much relevant to the tradition. We have discussion, or one technique that I think it was very successful is negative brainstorming. So, for example, instead of asking the participant or these young people how to be a good person, so I'm instead asking how to be a good person. Instead of asking how to take care of the environment, I ask them how to destroy or how to pollute the environment. And then we try to reverse from the negative answer so that they have their own answer. And also we provide some, so these are some pictures. So because of the pagoda is quite small and there are more than 200 people, so they have very happy outdoor classroom under the tree or, yeah. So the lesson there, so we learned that the young people, they learn and reflect. We have a test and evaluation, so there are some changes in their behavior and the practices. And we conclude that students should not only teach knowledge, skill, but also we need to include attitude to manipulate. And Buddhism should play a very important role in restoring the sense of living in a moral community and to make people aware of the situation that we are living in Cambodia. So I think public bioethics is an effective means in challenging people to shape their life in this changing world. So these are the pictures that I would like to share with you. So they have to walk, so just to raise the public awareness about how the young people are very interested in this kind of thing. You are very much welcome. Thank you for your attention.
We have time for just one question. Anyone show your hand?
Culture in Pakistan. I'll just make a comment. I think the last two papers are absolutely superb in showing two ways of looking at the same thing. The last talk particularly, we have the same issues. If you look at it, we're trying to do the same thing in Pakistan. The paradigm, unfortunately, that is often used is the Western paradigm that begins with principles. But when it comes down to practicality, we are facing the same issues. We're trying to bring in, you cannot talk of ethics or morality in Pakistan without bringing in religion. And I think ABA needs to be complemented because this is one place where we are beginning to see another point of view. Because I think our difficulty is that the paradigm within which we look at when we look at bioethics is a Western paradigm, and we need to bring in these different aspects into it to actually enrich it and get away from the four principles. Thank you.
Readers of the program will have noticed that we're now breaking the laws of time and space by having two people on at the same time at 10:15. Even I can't achieve that. So what we're going to do is to have Kirsty Morris, and then we'll take the coffee break, leaving Hyo Young Hee to the session after coffee. So Kirsty, over to you. Her title is Ethical Aspects Arising from the Involvement of Psychiatrists in Termination of Pregnancy.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to come along and talk today. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Kirsty Morris. I'm a psychiatrist from Sydney, Australia. I work at Prince Alfred Hospital, which is a large teaching hospital close to the centre of Sydney. And this paper really, I suppose, stems from my own personal experiences as a psychiatrist working in the general hospital rather than the psychiatry department of Prince Alfred Hospital. So, just to provide some background, psychiatrists, at least in Western countries like Australia, England and America, have a long history of involvement in advising decision-making in termination of pregnancy. And And prior to the liberalisation of abortion laws in these countries in the late 60s and early 70s, terminations were often permitted if the mother's life was at risk from psychiatric or medical conditions. But as time went on and medical treatments improved, the medical indications really no longer became as relevant, and psychiatric indications, I suppose, increased in importance. There was often the requirement for psychiatrists to actually certify that a woman would commit suicide unless she was granted a termination. So one author actually described the choices of the psychiatrist as callous honesty, dishonest compassion, or sanctimonious abstention, which I think sums up their choices fairly well. Another author describes psychiatry as society's face-saving answer to providing freely available abortion without outcry. Now, once abortion laws were liberalised, the involvement of psychiatrists declined, but as I'm going to describe, I believe that psychiatrists are now being involved in late terminations of pregnancy. So in terms of the legal setting, and of course I'm talking about Australia here, abortion legislation in all Australian states was originally based on British abortion law, which essentially made abortion illegal. And in 1967, the United Kingdom Abortion Act was passed, and this allowed a termination to occur if two doctors certified that the termination was necessary to protect the mother from risk to her life or her health, and if the baby was actually at risk of severe abnormality. Most Australian states then liberalised their laws, although for those of you who aren't aware, Australia has a federal government but also a number of state governments, and there's quite a lot of variability between termination law between the states in Australia. In New South Wales, which is where I work, the law was liberalised such that termination is still illegal unless, again, you can prove that there is risk to the mother's life or her mental or physical health. And the important point to note here is that it doesn't grant abortion if the fetus has an abnormality, and it also doesn't stipulate, I suppose, a limit in terms of gestational age. So fortunately I can save time because the work of this slide's pretty much been done for me in the last few days, but needless to say that there's a lot of controversy regarding the ethical or the status of the fetus with regard to personhood, and I suppose in regards to the morality of abortion. And this is pretty much the same in Australia, where I suppose debate about the ethics of termination, or the ethics of late termination, has really taken the place of debate about ethics of early termination at this point in time. So in terms of late termination, I should just provide a definition. The definition does vary, but in New South Wales it refers to terminations after 20 weeks of gestation, and in some other jurisdictions 24 weeks is the cut-off that's used. And again, these were originally performed for maternal medical indications, things like heart disease, diabetes, kidney failure. And some American literature has also shown that late terminations are associated with a late diagnosis of pregnancy, not surprising. And this is usually associated with psychosocial factors such as a low level of education, teenage pregnancies, living a long distance from an abortion clinic, and psychological factors such as denial. And of course, more and more these days, with advances in technology, fetal abnormalities are being diagnosed in utero, as we heard from one of the talks yesterday. And so fetal abnormalities are becoming more and more an indication or a reason for women to request a late termination of pregnancy. So there's not very much literature about the roles for a psychiatrist in this situation. And just to start with early terminations, these are just the theoretical roles that I came up with. A psychiatrist might counsel an existing patient with an unwanted pregnancy. Psychiatrists have expertise in the areas of mental illness and pregnancy, so the effects of medications on the fetus, parenting capacity in women with mental illness, etc. And a psychiatrist may also be involved in supporting a patient through the distress after a diagnosis of fetal abnormality. in late terminations, a psychiatrist might have these similar theoretical roles, and indeed late terminations are obviously much more emotionally challenging for not just the woman and her and the father of the fetus, but also the staff involved. I suppose psychiatrists are often involved in general hospitals in complex medical decisions. For example, we're often asked to assess people who want to donate kidneys because of this, I suppose, the psychological implications of that. And late termination of pregnancy could theoretically be conceived as one of these complex medical decisions. Psychiatrists in general hospitals are often called upon, I think, to act as clinical ethicists, and I put this in inverted commas because I really don't think psychiatrists have the training to be clinical ethicists, but we're often asked to assess the competence of patients, particularly when they're refusing particular medical or surgical treatments. Interestingly, we're not often asked to assess the competence of patients who are agreeing to medical treatments. And the other role for the psychiatrist in the general hospital is staff support. So the problems that I perceive in the involvement of psychiatrists in this situation is that, I suppose the first question is, do psychiatrists actually have a valid contribution to make? There's the problems of the double agent role, there's the problems of the potential abuse of psychiatric power, and ultimately the diminishment of the profession. So firstly, do psychiatrists have a valid contribution to make? Well, I suppose the general public don't often understand this, but psychiatrists are absolutely terrible at predicting things like suicide. So in that respect, I don't think we really do have a valid contribution to make. There's really no good evidence that carrying a pregnancy to term will be more harmful than termination of pregnancy or vice versa. So I don't really think that in terms of predicting mental harm, we're going to be much good in that respect. And really, although depression can compromise competence, and that there is evidence that depressed women or depression does influence the choices women make in regards to pregnancy, patients should be assumed to be competent and able to make treatment decisions, unless there really is good evidence to the contrary. And the woman's obstetrician really should be able to make that judgment. And I'll just skip over the last point in the interest of time. But the second problem that I perceive is the double agent problem, and this arises when one's responsibilities, loyalties include the hospital, the patient's family, the general community, the justice system, the insurance companies, social security systems, which can lead to conflicts of interest. And as an example, if a psychiatrist is seeing a patient who, because of their delusions, is at risk of killing a member of the general public, then the psychiatrist has to weigh up their conflicting responsibilities to the general public. And these can often involve conflicts of interest. Gosh, the time goes quickly, doesn't it? Okay. The third problem that I perceive is the abuse of power. Now, in Australian society, and I'm sure many societies, psychiatrists are granted quite a large amount of power. And this firstly arises from the legal powers of coercion that are granted to psychiatrists. This depends on the local Mental Health Act, but often it allows psychiatrists to admit and detain and treat patients involuntarily according to certain regulations. The power also arises from the mere fact of being a physician and I suppose the status that this allows us in society. And also from the inherent vulnerability of patients who are going along to see psychiatrists. Now, society also gives psychiatrists a role in non-psychiatric decisions based on mental function, as I've just outlined, and there's often pressure to manipulate the diagnosis in these respects. And just some extreme and very shameful examples of when psychiatry power has been misused. We heard about from Peter Dagan the other day. First of all, psychiatrists were quite instrumental in using their powers in Nazi Germany to initially sterilise and then euthanize people with mental illness and mental disability. And there have also been examples of similar misuses of power in the former Soviet Union. So I would argue that this ultimately leads to the diminishment of psychiatry as a profession, given that in order for physicians and psychiatrists to function as healers in society, there must be this assumption of trust, and fidelity must be an important and essential virtue. essential for people to become a patient. And I'd argue that this virtue can't be maintained if acting predominantly for another party. So my conclusions are that the decision to perform a late termination of pregnancy is a difficult and complex one, that perhaps society, we really need some clarity regarding society's views. Perhaps there is a need for legal reform to keep up with this demand for terminations based on fetal abnormalities, or perhaps really society hasn't really reached that stage and may not reach that stage. And ultimately I believe that psychiatry as a profession needs to consider its position in this situation. Thank you very much.
Get to the microphone. We have time for a couple of questions, I would say. Also, just join the queue on the microphone, please.
My heart sank when I knew there was a psychiatrist in the audience.
Psychiatric King's College, University of London. I basically totally endorse what you say. I mean, you must be happy for it to come from another psychiatrist. I mean, the last point you made was we have to reconsider our position as psychiatrists. I mean, as we know, psychiatry is almost equal with the so-called madness, and psychiatry has to become mental health. That's what I say, and I basically endorse what you said. And when it comes to abortion and assessing the ethical side, patient might be wondering whether there's no madness, why a psychiatrist is assessing me with the general perception. So my main message is psychiatry has to come out from psychiatry and make public health or mental health approach. So that's it. That's
absolutely, thank you. And I think we start off on a position of mistrust because they're actually not wanting to see a psychiatrist. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
And the last question, thank you.
Yes, I'm with the same law, that abortion can be done for a pregnant woman if the pregnancy affects her health. And my question is, when we said her health, it's a psychiatric health and physical health, how can you persuade or convince the court about a woman that suffering from personality disorders and depression to do abortion, it's affecting the law or not, or against the law or not? That's my question.
So that the pregnancy is putting her at risk. In my experience, these clinical predicaments actually aren't presented to a court. So the process in my hospital is that a multidisciplinary array of opinions are gathered, and then an ethics committee actually sits and hears the situation and provides advice, and ultimately it's the decision of the obstetrician. So the psychiatrist doesn't actually have to present this information to a court, but we're having to write a report that says something like, this woman is incredibly distressed and hence, she's putting herself at risk of mental illness, which really isn't strictly true.
There is now a break for tea and coffee. Please sit down, please. We want to get the session started as soon as possible. Thank you. We're going to start any minute now. Counting down.
Hello everybody, I am Ho Yang-mi. I am R&D person. My report about the covering nurses reforms of euthanasia. First of all, necessities of research include comparison and analysis of the covering nurses reforms of euthanasia, bringing social outcomes in euthanasia. And purposes of research were to survey levels of acceptance in euthanasia, reasons for patients' demands of euthanasia, attitudes toward euthanasia, levels of acceptance in living will, and differences in acceptance of living will. And now we can quickly look at definitions. Active euthanasia means aim to discontinue life, for example, injection of poisons. Passive euthanasia is neglect to delay the procedure of death, for example, removal of ventilator or feeding tube. Living will represents states clauses about his life indicates his desires in case of incurable disease. And now about research methods. Number 1, architectural research. Descriptive research who compares in the public and nurses' opinion toward euthanasia through questionnaire. Number 2, research targets are 220 100 nurses who are caring patients in terminal states at two general hospitals in Seoul City and one general hospital in Gyeonggi Province, and 200 public respondents excluding medical employees. For research tool, I used Rigunja's tool. Components of questionnaire were demographic characteristics, and these were pictured with 7 categories for the public, 6 categories for the nurses. And the number of euthanasia-related questions was 4, and the number of attitudes toward euthanasia was 25. Finally, chrome bar alpha was 0.68. In case of collection of questionnaire, I was collecting the questionnaire July the 8th to July the 15th for almost a week. Later, responsiveness was as high as 95.5%. For the nurses, 196 out of 220 questionnaire. For the public, 186 out of 200. For analysis, I used the SPSS program. I used demographic characteristics for real number percentage, levels of acceptance in euthanasia for real number percentage chi-square, reasons for demand of euthanasia for real number percentage, difference in attitude toward euthanasia for average standard deviation test, levels of living in for real number percentage chi-square, differences in levels of living in for real number percentage chi-square. However, since the research has been carried out by nurses working at 3 general hospitals and the public excluding patients and medical employees, it is not very easy to consider its results general. Here are research results. And of male. In terms of ages, the number of trainees was highest. The number of married respondents in the public sector and the number of singles in the nursing sector were higher. In the areas of religion, the number of Protestants was higher than the remaining. The number of nurses whose years of work is between 1 and 3 years was highest. Internal medicine department was higher than any other. Here are the public respondents' levels of acceptance in euthanasia for himself and for family member. In case of the public, 81.7% said yes to himself from euthanasia, 52% out of 81.7% chose passive euthanasia. And for family members, euthanasia, 61.3% said yes, 69.3% out of 61.3% chose passive euthanasia. In case of the nurses, 80.1% said yes to himself on euthanasia, 73.2% out of 80.1% chose passive euthanasia. And for family member euthanasia, 58.2% said yes, 86.8% out of 58.2% chose passive euthanasia. For the public euthanasia acceptance levels, there are meaningful differences in marital status, parents with or without children, and levels of education. And for the nurses, I could find some other meaningful differences in ages, years of work, and departments. In the responses, passive euthanasia was agreed by 64.6% of singles, 63.8% of childless persons, and 54.7% college graduate and above. In the nurses' responses, passive euthanasia was agreed by 100 of nurses older than 40, 9.5% of nurses who worked longer than 12 years, 100% surgical intensive care unit nurses, another 100% of hemodialysis room nurses. The public's euthanasia oxytocin levels for family members had meaningful differences in ages, marital status, parents with or without children, and occupations. Passive euthanasia oxytocin was shown in 83.3% of 20s, 84.2% of singles, 85.4% of childless persons, and 85.7% of office workers. Nurses' euthanasia oxytocin levels had meaningful differences in working departments. 100% of nurses accepted gynecology and hemodialysis room accepted passive euthanasia. For the public's oxytocin of living in, there are meaningful differences in gender and marital status. That is to say, remarkable differences were found in 92.7% of women, 92.9% of married people. And for the nurses, there are meaningful differences in gender of nurse. 93.2% of female nurses accepted living men. I found meaningful differences in the oxytocin levels of living men. 89.1% of the public and 93.6% of the nurses accepted living in. Regarding reasons for patients' demand of euthanasia, both the public and nurses consider present pain's first reason, and the second is loss of significance in life. You can see now 6 meaningful items here in the public and nurses' attitude toward euthanasia. Contents are can't give a patient because miracle happens in any way. Will be feeling unpleasant to discontinue patient's life for any reasons. Could take care of patient passively due to risk to possibility of recovery. Will feel unable while watching a hopeless patient who seems to be asking me to discontinue his life. Practice of legal euthanasia will cause collapse of trust between medical staff and patient. Science of medicine should not be used to discontinue life. For results, the public and nurses accepted euthanasia positively. Individual oxytocin euthanasia was greater than of family members. Present pain ranked first, loss of significance in life second, when asked the reason for patients' demand of euthanasia. Attitude of euthanasia were positive, and there are 6 meaningful items. Levels of oxytocin living in was also positive. Through this study, my conclusion includes that choice of life is dependent on patient's own opinion. Therefore, for social oxytocin, tolerance are necessary. Objective moral indicators, society and government's responsibility, and law and regulations to prevent hidden practice of euthanasia should be made. Finally, my suggestion are steadfast concern, research, and socially accepted values and philosophy of our life and death need our attention. Survey and analysis of euthanasia-related cases are also necessary. Continuous education about euthanasia bioethics for nurses are crucial. Thanks.
There is time for questions. Young Gios, if you can please indicate whether it's a question or a comment, and would you please speak slowly. So there are 1, 2, 3 hands I've seen on this side. If you could just line up the microphone. Yes, please.
I'm Yewang from China. I would like to know the attitude from the public and nurse. I want to know the government action. how to persuade the government to issue a law on euthanasia, because they are difficult in China. The Chinese would subjective to the government many times, but difficult to get the law now.
Democratic country, the government is mostly not involved in this kind of work. So it's all the personal things. If the government had the law, we cannot permit, government cannot permit active euthanasia. This is criminal. But other things depend on the patient or relatives.
Thank you.
Closeness between, say, passive euthanasia, do not resuscitate orders, advanced directives, living wills. Now, have they got any legal binding, or is it just sort of an indication of the patient what would like to do? In Australia, for example, the family can overturn all of these.
She needs an answer for her. Does the living will have legal force in Korea? Can anyone answer that? Or can it be overturned by the family?
One in the United States, but in Korea it's not really. Just no living will at all.
We have just time for one more.
Nurse have to educated about the euthanasia, but I tried to figure out. Did you give a very clear definition about euthanasia when you give the question now? That somebody had, because in your introduction you also mentioned about the withdrawal, last sustaining treatment, not only termination of life, and if it's not clarified well, that how could the nurse to answer the attitude. And this one other question, because my original background is nursing, so I'm also interested in that your nurse means nurse in Korea. Do they concerned about who is going to give the mercy, like a mercy killing, if we set a definition of euthanasia like mercy killing?
Okay, thank you. So two questions. One is, secondly, what do nurses' parts do nurses play in any active administration? You need your help again, or you're her voice, I think, and this will be the end of this question time.
Yes, I think there are absolutely exactly no distinct clarification about active. A few years ago in Korea, one had been taking oxygen, but his father turned off the oxygen switch, and soon she died. Is that the clarification of passive euthanasia or active euthanasia? So confused.
Nurses, would they be directly involved in giving terminal doses?
Yeah, just I think it's relatively active or passive, but if you put the poison and to kill, it must be active euthanasia.
Thank you very much. We now move to the second speaker, who is Dr. Sajid Saddam overhead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'd like also to thank to Gabriel, Mr. Sharaj. There will not be in an hour in the Innovation Network meeting, national meeting. Thank you again. Okay, the Assistant Secretary of State and asking to die and the Indonesian Muslim Society. So there are four key words. Brainstem there. The Assistant Secretary of State asking to die and Indonesia, especially Muslim Society. Okay, and this here is my name. Back in Sweden in the school, and I'm in the first University School of Medicine. Please go ahead. I'd like to start my discussion with ethical decisions are ultimately concerned with life and death. I think all agree with that. Definition of life and death in bioethics determine the financial burden of healthcare. Okay, go ahead, please. Next, please. Death, brainstem death are influenced by science and technology, religion, culture, ethics, and beliefs, local beliefs. There are many local beliefs. Okay, please go on. Yes, okay, science, technology. Go on, please. Second, please. Religions. Next. Local beliefs. There are many ethics in Indonesia. It is a very large country, consists of more than 1,000 million, 3,000 islands. Next. Other culture, many cultures. This all influence the definition of death. The next, please. This is Indonesia. It's located not far from Bangkok, southern to Bangkok, southern to Singapore, northern to Australia. Okay, next. This is the total Indonesia. It consists of multi-religions, multi-ethnics, several cultures, but the population are 88% registered as Muslim, but about 70% devoted to the Sharia, devoted Muslim, about 70, and totally registered as 80% of the population. This was, I started here, wait please, wait please, wait. I stay here in Surabaya, Jakarta is there. It is the island of Java, is most populated part of Indonesia. Next, please. We use the criteria of death. We use UK criteria, brain death. The aim is that avoid premature diagnosis of brain death and brainstem death. Avoid that. There are 3 brain conditions based on ventilator, coma, is the medial structure of brain damage, and no depression or muscular blocking drugs, no primary hyperthermia, no metabolic or endocrine abnormalities, and 5 tests. All reflexes of brainstem are negative, and no respiratory after stimulating this CO2 pressure more than 50 millimeter mercury for 10 minutes or more. Avoid premature diagnosis of brain death. Okay, like this. See? What is brain? This is the medial tube of the brain. Consciousness is a function of the cerebrum, the forebrain, and the brainstem. The brainstem is here. And the whole brain, the brain, and the small brain, cerebellum. Here located many centers of that is most important for our lives in brainstem, and is for cognitive function. Next, almost dying is in the dying process because he had a tumor in the brainstem here. It blocked the CSF cerebrospinal fluid circulation, blocks. There is tumor here in the brainstem, the forebrainstem, and the upper brainstem. This one. Now, what is regulation about brainstem death, brain death, and organ transplantation? Death is a process. According to the Indonesian Medical Association, statements and recommendation by ED, is Indonesian Medical Association. Death is a process. Death is not just a moment. It is a process. All cells in the body are the same vulnerable to hypoxia or anoxia. Definition of death is a conventional definition. and the next is brain dead, or brainstem dead. Next please. Again, for the sake of organ transplantation, the definition of brain dead is used, not the conventional definition. Recommendation, it is not yet legislated. Recommendation by Indonesian Medical Association in a certain condition in which therapeutic or palliative treatment is not useful anymore, that is, that its maintaining is contrary to the goal of medicine, it may be discontinued. The cessation of it is recommended to be consulted to at least one other doctor. Next. Now let's see the Indonesian legislation. We know we have the great book of criminal law, KUHP, Kitab Undang-Undang Hukum Pidana. Causing death is criminal. It are prohibited. Either it is intentional, unintentional, by mistake, error, or negligence, or upon request, provoke others to suicide, provoke others to commit suicide, and help others to commit suicide are prohibited. Next. This now by the acceptance of the Muslim society. We exclude the non-Muslim society. 71% accept the definition of brain death or brainstem death, but they want 31% to continue to agree to stop, to discontinue the life support, like to stop the life support, and the other 40% wants to continue the life support until heart function stop, and the other whatever the condition is, they will continue on the life support until the heart function stop, until the conceptual definition of death. Next, yes. Third condition. Next, please. Speculative state. What is speculative state? The clinical criteria be fulfilled. No evidence of awareness or self or environment, sacrifice, eye closure and opening still exists sufficiently preserved hypothalamic and brain cells. Next. Speculative state. Other clinical features. Next. This is not conscious, still open eyes, but he cannot move, he cannot do anything. Swallowing is difficult. Eat by tube, feeding. Next. Speculative state. This, okay? Go on, please. 2 minutes.
If you wish,
yeah.
Just ask questions.
The article Bravo versus the vegetative state. How long should vegetative state be stated as persistent? It is difficult. How long could the patient in vegetative state live? Could be limited to treatment once the vegetative state is declared permanent. 6 months, 12 months. The ED, ID, the treatment is not enormously useful, contrary to the goal of medicine. It may be discontinued. Life support may discontinue. This is Islamic concept. That only that life is body, Allah affection in due proportion and breathe into him the ruh and the spirit, the soul by Allah of that person. Next, the right to take one's life because he gave the life and only Allah has the right to take the life. Next. Asking to pray, and when the term comes, neither can they delay it, and they advance it, movement. Only Allah is dead, well, the term of dying. Next. Summary, basic concept of brain death, the brain subject, persistent vegetative state, asking to die, and the reason is about 70% devoted question. Brain death and brain death is accepted by national legislation and the Medical Association. A certain figure is that although there is some difficulty to state, the persistent figure is said the figure is persistent. ID recommend prohibited, committing suicide is prohibited, praying for dying is also prohibited, helping someone to die by our law, helping someone to commit suicide is legislated that is also prohibited. Two cases I'd like to report. A young lady became comatose after surgical chirurgical intervention due to brain ischemia, comatose. She remained unarousable, but sluggish light effects still possible. Perhaps dying. Second case. And the diabetic patient, he is a professor in medicine, professor in biomolecular medicine. He got cardiac attack and respiratory arrest after heroic resuscitation, aerobic, and administration of vasoactive drug. While he recovered, he complained severe neuropathic pain on his right leg, which has a small ulcer was found. He consulted Nostad is Lama. Nostad, is there any ayah, any
versus
any
I think there's no time for questions because 15 minutes was taken up. If you have questions, please approach the speaker afterwards. We come to our last speaker, Norman Bailey, and his topic is when personal interests come into conflict with the patient's interests and what could, should, or would be done about it.
I'm Norman Bailey. I'm a clinical professor at the University of Houston College of Optometry in Houston, Texas, USA. In addition to my attending clinic duties, I am also a lecturer in public health and ethics. I come to you as a clinician rather than a researcher. Prior to joining the faculty at the University of Houston 26 years ago, I was in the private practice of my profession for 10 years in Charlotte, North Carolina in the USA. Between 1991 and 2001, I was a member of the Ethics and Values Committee of the American Optometric Association. My comments I bring to you from this background of experience and interest. Healthcare practitioners may at times face dilemmas where doing that which is best for the maximum benefit of the practitioner may not lead to that which is best for their patients. Conflicting interests are a part of everyday life around which we must make decisions, often major decisions. There may be times when our personal interests should take precedence, but more likely, there are more times when the interests of others should come first, especially those of our patients. Changes to the healthcare industry in the U.S. have led to concerns of potential, if not actual, conflicts of interest. Due to consumer advocacy movements of the 70s and 80s, there has been an increase in entrepreneurial activities of professionals in healthcare that previously would have been considered unprofessional by many, if not outright unethical. Having ancillary business activities in conjunction with professional fiduciary responsibilities conflicts with the professional's first concern, which should be for the patient. In ethical and legal discourse, we often hear the phrase conflicts of interest when referring to those circumstances where the private interests of a person in a position of trust conflict with other responsibilities. Such conflicting interests can make it difficult to impartially fulfill professional obligations. In such an atmosphere, confidence in the ability of the professional to act properly in service to patients is compromised. This environment can undermine a favorable patient-practitioner relationship. Before continuing with this line of thought, I would like for us to step aside for a few minutes and take a look at our professional backgrounds, which may guide us in deciding what we could, would, or should do when faced with these conflicting interests. Historically, there have been expectations placed upon the behavior of individuals within the professions which would usually not be placed on the average businessman or woman as far as that goes. These expectations have existed to protect patients from incompetence, from uncaring, or from selfish excesses. Behavior of an exceptional nature is expected of health professionals because of the unusual vulnerability of patients to unprofessional conduct. The average patient is not capable of fully understanding the nature of their health disorders. Patients are dependent upon and trust that the practitioner is providing them with competent care in an environment where the patient's needs come before those of the practitioner. Most health professions have professional standards in the form of codes of ethics and oaths to guide the behavior of their practitioners. The broad ethical principles under which healthcare professions function have remained relatively constant over many years. The values directing professional behavior in the health professions have come from a number of historical and authoritative sources. We acknowledge the presence of these professional values as the underpinnings of professional codes of ethics and standards of behavior. The health professional must be knowledgeable of the values central to the relationship with the patient and be committed toward following the principles these values support, even if some self-sacrifice is required. The fiduciary responsibility held by the health professions toward the public is significant and requires recognition of both standards of clinical practice and standards of professional behavior. It has been noted that this fiduciary relationship is dependent on the trustworthiness of the individual professional and the profession at large. Professionals and professions are expected to control their own self-interest, especially when these self-interests may not serve those under their trust. Since the time of Hippocrates, some of the more important moral values in healthcare, often stated as principles, have included trust, respect for life, benefiting others, avoiding harm, confidentiality, and collegiality. In more recent history, respect for autonomy, which acknowledges the individual's right to make healthcare choices through the provision of adequate information, has gained prominence. Truth-telling and the avoidance of deception have become essential in this regard. Just as important is the protection of those who are unable to exercise this autonomy. The ethical principle of justice, requiring the fair distribution of available healthcare resources while seeking to treat similar cases similarly, has increased in societal importance. Today's health professionals in the U.S. face increasing challenges as they try to curb personal interests in favor of patient interests. Many daily circumstances place the practitioner in a position of having to decide between that which is best for their practice and that which is best for their patients. With the growth of health insurance power, the practitioner is often placed in the precarious position of having to make financial decisions for the practice to remain viable or to make decisions in the best interests of their patients. Historical fee-for-service methods of reimbursing practitioners for healthcare services in the U.S. have been seen as incentives for practitioners to provide more services than medically necessary in order to increase their incomes, especially when they are being reimbursed by third parties, as insurance companies, rather than directly being reimbursed by their patients. Many professionals counter this accusation by saying that excessive services have to be provided in a society where legal action can be brought against a health practitioner for not ordering enough tests to quickly rule out any possible diagnosis. Patients do not frequently complain about fees for these excessive services, since health insurance companies typically pay most of the doctor's charges. With this behavior leading to expanding costs, deflationary incentives, if you will, to counter overutilization of services were put into place by the insurance companies. This latter practice in itself can result in less than ideal outcomes for the patient. To overcome reduced fee-for-service reimbursement rates, another deflationary incentive of insurance companies, some practitioners may increase services to any extent possible in order to increase their profits. Other insurance cost-saving programs have incentives to reward practitioners by sharing cost savings or punish them by having the practitioner share financial risk. The impact on the patient-doctor relationship by pitting doctor interest against the best interest of the patient is obvious. In addition to these insurance company practices, there has been an upsurge in entrepreneurial activities in healthcare that have threatened the patient-practitioner relationship. The onset of the consumer movement in the 70s and 80s brought U.S. federal court and agency decisions that forced changes in the way professions conducted themselves. The courts found unconstitutional many of the state and professional association rules and regulations governing professional practice, which were seen as non-competitive in nature. Of course, regardless of the view of the courts, entrepreneurial and commercial practices with a profit motive can create private interests that run counter to the professional's obligation to be a fiduciary for the patient. By their nature, these are conflicting interests. With limited practitioner experience in managing such wide-open business practices within the health professions, excesses could have been expected to occur. The open behavior of the marketplace is not always conducive to protecting the interests of patients. In addition, an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association reported that congressional investigations, federal prosecutions, and class action lawsuits have brought to light documents demonstrating how certain health industry practices frequently cross the line between patient welfare and profit-seeking behavior.